They said the first dragon of the north did not scream when it hatched. It exhaled a plume as pale as hoarfrost and shook itself free of shell and steam, while the hot springs under the heart of the castle filled the godswood with melting snow. The men who were there would later swear they smelled pine sap and old ashes. The women would remember the light gentled by the weirwood's red leaves, as if a priest had cupped stained glass over a candle. A boy with a wolf pelt across his shoulders named the hatchling Ghostwing. Though the creature was all frost-white and moon-silver, no more a ghost than the boy was a man. The dragon blinked with red eyes that seemed to hold embers of a vanished city, and on its first crooked steps across wet roots left prints that steamed and froze in the same breath. In that white breath, the north changed its stories. The singers kept the tales of wolves and dead things in the snow, of the time the night had teeth and the day had no warmth, and those would never be taken from them. But as Ghostwing grew, curling in the mist like a cat beside the steaming pools, other tales took root. Of the line of Stark reborn in fire, of the blood that had once crossed seas astride monsters with burning bellies, of a house with a winter's face and a dragon's heart. They called the first Lord Frostfire by half a dozen names in the early ballads, as if new sobriquets would shape him into something other than what he was. Some called him Jon's son, others Jon's grandson, and a few simply said he was Jon wearing a different winter of years. Stories do that when they're asked to knit the gaps in a lineage that seems impossible. None of the arguments mattered when the white dragon took the air above the battlements, poured a curtain of pale fire across snow-buried fields, then settled on the Lord's outstretched arm like a hawk, huge and trusting as a storm that comes when summoned. The old sigil, gray dire wolf on white, took on a second form in the tapestries hanging in the hall, wolf and dragon twined. The words that had always meant endurance took on a taste of vow. For the winters of men and the winters of the sky are not the same, and that truth must be taught afresh in every generation. The children of the north learned to track the shadow of a dragon over the drifts as once they had tracked a fox's footfall. They learned how glass candle heat can bloom from obsidian when a rider runs a hand along a certain striation. They learned the care of scales and flight leathers and how to sing a drake back to the stone when it wanted to vanish into cloud. Ghostwing chose its own lair, of course. No dragon has ever been told where to sleep and agreed. There were arrow-slit caverns above the godswood that no man had surveyed in living memory, and the dragon shouldered in there and polished the basalt with its breath. And the castle stones grew warm in winter in a way that no steward could wholly account for. The maesters ran their hands along walls and wrote careful letters by featherlight. They kept this new warmth in their ledgers beside lists of barley and candle tallow. Even they, bound to reason, stared out at white wings cutting the gray and felt their thoughts catch like thread in a hawk's talon. One winter, bandits from the long coast north of the Bay of Seals found the courage to ride in, believing that stories were better left on southern tongues. Ghostwing descended on their fires at dusk. The light of that pale flame had a queer quality to it, as if it did not so much burn as teach cold how to burn. The bandits lifted their faces and saw their beards bead with ice. Afterwards, the dragon bathed in the hot spring as if it had returned from a hunt in some colder sky, and the steam turned to feathered frost where it met the dragon's breath. It was at the tail of that winter that a second egg hatched, deep in the caverns of Dragonstone, where a young woman sent south to study ancient stone had taken to sleeping in the glyphed shadow of a basalt beast. She was called Asha by her mother and Elena by the letters of scholars, and she wore iron plates sewn into leather, practical as any woman who had grown up with wolves. She returned to the north astride a narrow-hipped, ash-gray drake with eyes like fog. They named him Winter's Tongue because of the way his fire tasted in the air, and because Asha laughed and said he spoke to her in syllables of breath. Their pairing and their return made official what rumor had already crowned. The Frostfires were a house. They had no patience for salt thrones or silk, no hunger for the exacting sums of ports, but they did not let gold pass them by when it came in peace. They took tithes in wool and heat, winter fuel and long furs, and the promise that when the chill bit too deep they would fly. Lords in the south wrote letters that began with curiosity and ended with calculation. Treasurers in Old Town stirred in their sleep. A white dragon by a cold castle is more dangerous to a banker than to a soldier. A soldier knows where his fear lives. A banker is afraid in his ink. In the fourth generation, the Frostfires built Skystead on Skagos, stone by stone, with the help of men who called themselves islanders and did not bow easily. It was a tall eyrie on a scarp where storms are born, and its arches had been drawn by a woman who cared for both wind and beauty. No dragon was forced to roost there, but most could not resist. The place spoke to something in their bones. A steppe of heather and lichen above the sea grew a small city of farrier fires and metalwork. For the first time since the burning of the old cities across the sea, men forged collar and stirrup for the great beasts with lore of their own rather than borrowed songs. No chain to make a slave, no lash to turn a sovereign into a serf. There is a way to bind with a thing without binding it. There is a way to ride without owning. In the 6th generation after, ghost stories of iceborne raiders returned, after the last king of the Summergreen South died without sons. After a girl with a birthmark in the shape of a bird on her wrist flew over the neck and found it blooming and brown, there came the Frost Feast. The dragons had never been soot or rust, for they flew too often, their minds too alive to let themselves fall to yard-clung metal. But they molt scales the way a pine sheds bark, and the scales are not wholly disobedient even after they're gone. A maester with beautiful penmanship thought to boil a cask of scales with pine tar and iron filings while speaking words the first rider had written in his hand for a girl whose name had been washed out by long use. The cask smoked with a lily's breath and popped like sap on a log, and what was left in the bottom would take a flame and hold it like a secret. They made lanterns from that. They hung them along the causeways of Wintertown, so that in the black of winter men walked in a soft light the color of snow at dusk. When it was time to fly, the lanterns were put out and the air was left to the wings that owned it. Every house that survives long enough will show its flaw in public, and every house will pretend it did not. The Frostfires had 3. They loved the free folk as cousins and kin. They did not forget their debts, and they disliked salt on their tongues when they had not asked for it. In the 9th generation, a man from the Dreadfort, sharp in his cheekbones and sharper in his opinions, argued that dragons should be used to break old grudges. He had a list in his pocket with names he would enjoy turning to ash. The Lord Frostfire, called Corin by those who had no use for titles, let him talk until the drake behind him lowered its head. A dragon's breath is loud and soft at once. It fills the ear and the chest with sound, and it makes a man think of a loved one exhaling. Corin put his hand on the scaly jaw and flatly said that a house that has a dragon must be the house that needs it least. It was not enough, and that man and a clutch of bitter men caught hold of a day when the northern sky had gone pearl and the dragons were off in the hills, hunting lightning. They reached for Wintertown with torch and grievance and learned the smell of their own hair burning, because the free folk and the small folk pulled water from the hot springs and flung it with 1,000 hands. The rising steam took the breath from the rebels' lungs, and old women stood up to their waists in it and sang. No dragon was needed. On the 3rd day the dragons returned, and one landed among the buckets and put its wing out like a tent, and the town cheered the way men cheer a child for coming home at sundown. In the 12th generation, when a southern queen bent under a crown she had not made and a war cried from the riverlands like a winter goose that cannot find a field to land in, the Frostfires were asked to descend and make a peace with fire. It is one of history's cruel jokes that they listened. They sent 2 dragons and a promise of leniency, and the first fought a sky stitched with bolts the size of a farmer's leg. The southern engineers had been careful and clever, and if cleverness were country it would have swallowed half the map. One of the bolts found bone. The dragon fell through a rain of men and arrows, and its rider Lyra, who had shot upriver on dragonback as a child as other girls sail skiffs, came down on an empty granary. Toddlers still stumble into the square where that granary stood and lift their hands to the air, the way children will wave at sunlight for no reason at all, because memory has left a taste in the dust. The Frostfires buried rider and dragon together, and when the first snow of the season fell it held to that mound as to a thing it loved. It is also history's cruel trick to make mourning the very thing that turns kind houses cruel. In the years that followed there were burned barns and empty wells and the smell of fat in old stone. Corin's grandson, Mardane, knelt in the gods' wood to ask forgiveness of a tree that did not exist to forgive him. A winter fox padded up and sat watching while the man confessed to bark. The dragon nearby exhaled, and the fox turned to the heat as animals turn to truth. as if it knew men set themselves on fire inside and needed to sit near a different sword for balance. Mardane lifted a hand and the dragon came near enough for him to feel the tip of its tongue touch his palm. Light as a question. Dragons went missing in the 15th generation. For a long while the ledger of the sky had never been long, for the north does not take easily to families of beasts, nor dragons to the colors of snow. One laid a clutch on the cliffs above the shivering sea that slid and shattered as the birthing mother shook with a fever brought by some new-birthed spring. Another vanished into cloud above the frostfangs and never returned. In the long dark of that winter, the frostfires began to tell stories not about what they would burn, but about what they would remember if the dragons went. It was a good exercise, the kind a house forgets to do when it has many teeth and more friends. They wrote a list of all the things that had not required flame to save. A child in a drift, a ship found by lantern, a woman who sang another woman through a birth when no midwife could cross a snowed gate, a wolf taken from a trap and set to run. They told the list to their sons and daughters and called it the Compact. If the language sounded like a treaty between a house and itself, it was because it was. They did not lose the last dragons. They lost the habit of speaking to them confidently. The beasts grew older and flights shorter, and the lanterns of Frostfeast had to be rolled with new resin and old hope. The maesters in the tower put their gray heads together and tried to stop recommending leeches. Someone learned to write to the Citadel for books by Night Soil Sea, Erevan, and things that had been read aloud beside glowing hearthstones began to arrive wrapped in paper that smelled like onions and rain. In the 17th generation, a girl with hair the color of moonlit oak read to a dragon on the castle roof. Her books were from the south, but the words she chose were northern, full of knives with names and men who apologized to their barns when they pounded nails. The dragon listened with its eyes half-lidded, and sometimes when the girl stuttered, because she did, and turned her stumbles into song to survive them, the dragon's throat trembled in the same rhythm. Peace is a field that must be reseeded every spring. All houses forget this and remember it and forget again. In the 19th generation, wolves and dragons hunted together in the hills. It sounds like a story a drunk would tell and is true anyway. A pack ran a herd of elk to a valley, and the dragon set a wall of steam between the herd and the escape routes. The frost condensed on antler and eyelash, and when the wolves came in, it was with the solemnity of butchers who thank their work. Men watched from a ridge, silent. The biggest wolf turned its head up and considered them and then returned to the feast. The dragon crawled down and picked up what the wolves had left, and when it took a last mouthful, it passed for a breath over the men. For a month afterwards, their beards were white where the breath had touched. It is not just in battle that world turns. A dragon's wing is a shingle for rain. A dragon's belly can warm a hall without smoke. A dragon's sleep can coax a woman home when she has wandered too far into grief. In the 20th generation, a woman with hair clipped short like a soldier's and a scar across her mouth took the long stair up to Ghostwing's ledge with a basket of rocks. They were not eggs, and she had no magic. What she had was a desire to see what would happen if you lay something in a warm place and waited without presumption. She put one rock at a time beside the dragon's foreleg and then went to sleep by the spring. In the morning, 3 rocks had cracked themselves into petals. Their centers were iron and their edges white shell, and the dragon had curled around them like a hen. It was nothing and also not nothing. The woman stopped being followed by the taste of ashes when she bit bread. Small miracles are not things you can write into a ledger, but if a house is to live centuries, it had better have a chest full of them. By the 23rd generation, the Frostfires had become so steady in their steadiness that the world believed it could lean on them without asking. Ambassadors came from far and south with contracts for grain. The dragons flew less and the ledgers grew longer. In that era, a boy named Jaren was born with one arm shorter than the other. He had the look that makes old women tell young women to be careful where they put their hearts. He laughed without permission and put warmth into rooms like a lamp brought from the next chamber. He read the Compact until he could quote it in his sleep and then decided to treat it as a living thing. He flew Ghostwing's last daughter under a sky that smelled of iron and trout and kissed a girl from Wintertown who had set her life aside to repair the roofs that lightning tore. When someone told him a lord does not marry a roofer, Jaren said he did not intend to be a lord but a husband, and if a lord came with it, then he would build her a better ladder. They placed their first child, a daughter, in the crook of an old dragon's wing, and the dragon breathed out and made her hair lift in the gentle currents of her breath until the baby stopped her wriggling and watched the air, ecstasy wide on her face. No house escapes a civil war. It may be small, it may be silent. It may be settled with a loaf of bread and 2 long looks across a table instead of spear and banner, but the break will come. When Jaren's sister was passed over for a seat she had been promised, she did not draw a sword. She went to Skystead and stood on the highest parapet it had to offer, where storms come in with the dignity of kings, and she called down lightning by standing there long enough to earn it. She did not die. She woke in her bed with her eyebrows gone and a dragon sprawled across the flagstones with its head in her lap. The dragon had a look of concentration, and every few heartbeats it exhaled a short, white breath on her hands. The healers told her don't move, and she obeyed, for once. When she rose, her fingers had forgot their tremors. She went to her brother and said, voice flat as a lake on a windless noon, give me work worthy of me, or you will get a war unworthy of all of us. He gave her Skystead and the right to write letters under the seal. The letters she sent were like spears wrapped in wool. Men bled and said they felt nothing. In the 25th generation, a stranger came with a birch bark canoe and a story about an egg buried where the ground moaned. The Frostfires had learned when to take a story and when to feed the storyteller, and this they took. They flew north to a place where the world gaped open and the rocks sweated in the grip of unseen fires. The egg was there, a complication of stone and shell and glass, and it pulsed under the palm of the woman who found it, like a child kicking late. They wrapped it in wolf fur and carried it south between wing and heart. It took 3 winters to persuade it of the value of dawn, by which I mean it took 3 winters of reading to it, of covering it in warm breath, of kissing it as one kisses a fevered brow, of remembering that not all birth is a conquest. When it cracked open, the dragon that came out was the color of wet ice, and when it opened its mouth to cry, the sound was lower than hearing and higher than sense. They named it Quiet. Quiet grew and disliked ribbon, and did not mind children, and carried the old and the young across bad water with the patient air of a fairy woman who knows the weight of the world. They are a house now the way a mountain is a mountain, by having had time to be itself, by having been named by men who needed to point at a thing and agree on where to meet near it. The Frostfires learned not to love their dragons as tools. The compacts deepened. They married men and women who smelled like smoke from hearths rather than pitch. They married shipwrights and shepherds and a wildling chief who told them a joke about the first person he'd ever seen try to teach a reindeer to wear a saddle. They buried their dead and did not burn them unless they had begged for fire when alive. A man who feels owed by time burns easily. A woman who leaves tobacco at stones does not. The balance owes as much to the women as to the beasts, and there are men who say so in wine and silence both. When the 29th generation took the seat, it did so under a sky that had been blue for 3 days straight in midwinter, rare enough to put questions in the beards of men who measure their mornings by cloud shapes. The new Lady Frostfire rode quiet. She was called Mara, though men who wished to flatter her hung longer vowels on either side of it. She was the sort of rider who spoke in syllables you could carve on a stick and carry with you, and she had a gift for hearing when people expected flame and finding water. In the first year of her rule, a southern house demanded she send a dragon to settle an argument over border stones that hadn't moved in 3 lifetimes. She sent carpenters and a barrister from a family that carved chessmen in winter. Watching that troop come over the hill, the man who had thought to force dragon fire into the argument remembered how to laugh like a boy. There was war, of course. There is always war somewhere, like rain in a far wood. When it came to the snowlands, not as spear points but as scarcities. The sort of war that does not get painted because you cannot paint a field without rabbits. The Frostfires began sending their dragons to pull sledge through drifts with ropes and harnesses meant for oxen. A dragon that has learned to carry a man is not insulted by a rope if the rope is tied by reverent hands. They drag wood from downed forests. They haul stones for a widow who will not go through a second winter with a broken wall. They fly over rivers, and their shadows net fish by accident. They are not gods. They scratch at their chins with hind talons. They get old. Their eyes go cloudy and their flights shorten, and the day comes, as it does for men and barns and songs, when their breath comes in small, neat parcels, like bread cut for a child. After the white dragon, the first old Ghostwing, after her descendants and her kin and her opposites, after the gray and the ash, after quiet, there will be other names. There will be smaller bright things and larger slow things, and a beast that does not fly much, preferring the ground and the conversation of men who mend their tools outside for an excuse to watch the sky. There will be long years without a hatchling, when the house must remember what the compact looks like in the absence of a dragon's gale. There will be a year, and this is perhaps the point of telling it, when a boy with a stutter stands before a clutch in the warm light at the heart of Winterfell and cannot make the song go the way his sisters did. Because the words keep willowing and his throat keeps setting up fences that his breath is too shy to leap. He will sit there with the egg and cry and not know he is doing it. The dragon inside will not mind. The egg will listen to the rhythm of his breath and find it enough. When the shell finally splits, the dragon will not scream. It will breathe and steam will rise, and the boy's tears will turn to frost and then to drops. And he will laugh as if he has swallowed the house's entire history, and it is trying to get out through his ribs all at once. This is how the story runs. A man of winter loved a woman of fire, and from their line came a house that learned not to mistake either for a weapon or a creed. Their dragons were never truly theirs. The beasts came when called most of the time and sometimes did not, and they lifted men to see further and heat a barn and end a fight or begin one. A house is something like a dragon's wing. It keeps a shape in the air for a while and then it falls. The trick is to find something in that fall that can be used to build the next lift. The Frostfires have learned to be the house the world uses to measure its breath, to stand where the wind comes and know what it takes to stand at all. When the last of them sits old and grateful beneath the weirwood, she will say to the young beside her, "When the dragons are sleeping, remember how to help your neighbor mend his roof." And if they are hard of hearing and think she said roof when she meant heart, perhaps they will do both. That is how a house survives not one winter, but centuries. She will die there, warm in her furs and with a white feather of frost on her lip, because a dragon blowing gently on the air beside her cannot help itself from loving. Her grandchildren will carry her to the crypts, and above them, just then, a dragon will sweep the sky with a wing that cuts sunlight into ribbons. A woman from the town will look up, moved without knowing why. And somewhere the boy with the stutter will laugh again, still surprised by what fitting your breath to an old, patient thing can make of you. He should have died in the black cells. The water there had a voice that belonged to men with no faces left to wear, and the stones sweated a memory of old pain. Eddard Stark lay on his back and counted slow, for counting had steadied him in boyhood when fear came like a wind under the door. Footsteps overhead made a pattern he did not recognize until a light that had no business being born in such a place found his eyes and made him wince. The eunuch was not a shadow. The eunuch was a man with breath that smelled faintly of cloves. Varys's lamp held a circlet of dim fire that did not have to be carried so carefully and yet was. "If a great house is an ox in a yoke, Lord Stark," the spider murmured, "there are nights when it must strain or break. I cannot give you your honor back, but I can give you your feet." It should have been a jest to mention honor there. It was a mercy. It was not he who walked the first yard, but the boy he had been at 10, stepping off a bank into river, trusting his father's hand. The old soldier who had taught him the sword had said once that the long work of soldiering is not battle but starting. Eddard stood and started. Varys had a key that bit into the lock with a noise no jailer relishes. He had a bundle with a cloak that smelled of vinegar and pitch. He had a plan that was no better than a dare and therefore good enough for a man at the end of a hallway. They had counted the guards, and they had guessed at the dog, and they had prayed the dog was asleep. The dog in the guardroom raised its head and sniffed and slept again. Men are not the only creatures patched out of mercy and luck. Ned went through a door that did not open but turned on a grinding hinge. The builders in the long ago had loved their handwork, and found in passage a wind that tasted like kitchens and onion stew. Varys pinched out the lamp at a corner and left Ned in a darkness that was nothing like the cells. On his back like a half-drowned carp, Ned felt cool air on his face and almost wept at the ordinary sin of it. Varys's hand touched his wrist, light, persuasive. At the end came his breath, gentle as a whisper near a sleeping child. "Is a cart and a boy and a cloak that will scratch. With your leave, my lord, I have lied enough for both of us." He came out under a sky that had forgotten how to do stars. The boy with the cart was no one and would never be anyone. The cloak was in fact scratchy. The city beyond them had the look of a man who has eaten too much and will be angry when the pain arrives. Ned bent to climb in and felt something tear in his side. Pain laced him like hail. He pushed it down and lay with his face to the boards. The cart moved. A woman's voice somewhere cried a name as if it were a prayer. He thought of Kat, of Rob, of the girls, of the boy he had called his bastard, of the empty space in his family's house around his brother's absence, around his sister's absence, around all the absences houses learned to carry like a second spine. The city rolled around him like a sea. He smelled tar and bread and dung and oranges. He slept between breaths and woke when the cart stopped at a gate where men who were bad at their jobs stood with spears too clean to have been earned. The boy who drove tapped him twice, the signal he had been taught, and he rolled on to a pallet behind sacks of millet. Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, crawled like a mouse into his second life. He did not know until later that his youngest daughter was stalking the streets in rags a mile away, her blade a sliver of reminder in a sleeve. He did not know his elder girl slept with her hands knotted under her cheek the way she had as a toddler, dreaming of warm bread and a long table and a castle that had not taught her yet what it cost to be a girl. When he learned both, years later, he would close his eyes and let his forehead touch stone, and that would be the only time after he left the city that he would let himself weep. They went by river. Men who have no business living sometimes live. That is the only rule that holds in the fast water of the world. The boat rocked him like the cradle he had no memory of. The oars whispered. The man who rowed had veins like cords and a song in his mouth he did not let out. The marsh opened ahead like a low jaw. Once they grounded crossing a bar and had to push off with poles, old mud sucking at them, the smell of brine and rotting rushes in their mouths like a warning. Past the reeds, where the world is effaced by fog to the comfort of men who have done wrong. A light winked and went out and winked again. Howland Reed's men were playing their old games with the sky. Ned felt a laugh in his throat that had nowhere to go and swallowed it lest he break the world. The hall at Greywater Watch was where it always is if you know what a moving island does with its mornings. The Crannogmen took him in without solemnity and gave him a bowl of fish stew so hot it questioned the tongue. They let him sleep, and when he woke Howland was sitting with bare feet on a log and his hands busy with a spear point, and the man looked up and smiled as if they had agreed to meet an hour ago. "You've got yourself killed and not," he said. "Caitlin is somewhere counting the stitches between breath and sob. Rob is a boy who will do what a boy should not when he loves his father, which is to pretend to be a man. Then we will learn the river." It sounded like a lesson and not like war, which is the first time Ned Stark understood he might live longer if he burned less quickly. Ravens ranged. Some he sent. Some were sent by men who hated him, who had always secretly hated the way he put his hand on a bannerman's shoulder and said the exact truthful thing that a man cannot argue with. The ravens made the sky look like a dress with black embroidery and told the North this. The warden lived and the crown would call him traitor until the crown learned to love truth. The ravens also told the neck this. Do not let the South pass. The Crannogmen took to their tasks the way beavers take to a river. A reed bed that had been navigable last week became a floating surrender of moss that would take a spear as easily as a foot. A causeway that had been firm turned watery with the removal of 3 stones men had thought were part of earth itself. Hounds brought by men who had used hounds to make their courage for them essay. Tea down and looked embarrassed, sneezed, drank bog water, sickened, recovered, and refused to go on. When the first southern host put a boot on the long stony road of the neck, the Crannogmen played music with frogs. It is a strange thing to hear. A choir of throats, a percussion of plop, a rhythm like men slapping their thighs slow. In the fog it is as good as a legion. Ned watched from a rise of bramble while a column with good boots and clean banners tried to find courage at the end of their spears. The banner points made small punctures in the cloud as if they were drawing their own map of fear. They will flank. A man at his shoulder muttered reflex. Let them, Howland murmured. We have 3 lefts to their right. They will march west and arrive north, if they arrive at all. Ned let a smile halfway up into his beard and then put it back down. On the day the first blood was really spilled, Ned wore a breastplate his daughter would have called unhandsome and that she would have been right about. He knelt at the edge of a pool and touched the water. It was brown as tea. The frogs sang. Men appeared where men always appear, by command and coin and hunger. He rose and put a plan in motion that would come to be called Reed's Knotted Road by men who like to name things after themselves. Lures made from reeds and straw and old cloth made ghosts in the mist. The Southern soldiers took bait, which is another way of saying they were men and could not bear the uncertainty. They squandered their formation in a slow unraveling like a rope worn by a door ring. When the first horse stumbled into a patch of bog and went to its belly with a scream, the fight was decided in all but aftermath. Ned did not fight as he had in the rebellion. He did not fling himself at the heart of a thing to cut it. He let things unheart themselves. He kept his sword clean longer than he wanted to and told himself that if he used it later, it would be for better reason. When he did draw it, it was to end something that could not be left to become tomorrow. There is more courage in restraint than in assault. It takes more steel to hold your hand steady on a rein than to let it loose. He learned that too late, as most men do. After, he wrote to Rob in a hand that made a boy smile because in it he saw not Lord but Father. He wrote to Caitlin with 3 times as many words and cut a third of them and sent half of what remained. He wrote to the Lords of the North and the Trident and chose his syllables as if they were stones stepping across a river that wanted him down. He wrote to Stannis. To Renly he did not write, and to Balon he sent a shipwright with a purse and questions. The shipwright came back with his trousers ruined and a queer grin. The Iron Suitor wants his son returned and his sea unruled, my lord. He likes the sound of his own history more than he enjoys this morning's breakfast. Ned sat with that and then sent Theon Greyjoy a letter by a man he trusted not to say words he was not given. And the letter asked the boy a question no one had asked him yet. Did he wish to be a man of a house that had kept him alive, or a son of a house that would use him for kindling? Neither was a kind question. He let the boy decide his own hurt. He would not know until later, and poorly then, that the decision had been made in a boat on a fog night by a boy who wanted to love a father he had made for himself and a father who had not made him. Theon took ship. He grinned at things that did not want grinning at. He begged the life of a man who did not trade such things, and in the end he was a boy left on a beach by men who had more salt than tears. In that telling, Winterfell did not fall to a son who had grown untrue, but to men whose maps had no words for the north other than edges. In another telling, one that Ned liked, there was no sacking but a stand of old men and boys that turned raiders aside not by valor but by the invisible gravity of belonging. The truth lived between. They did not go south at once. The north is a lesson you cannot hurry. Ned brought the banners to Moat Cailin and set them down. The Crannogmen sang and argued and ate, and there were tables with bowls of stew that made men from the high hills dream of their mothers. He gave Roose Bolton a command that had teeth and a leash. Hold the eastern causeway and send daily letters with numbers of men and measurements of bread. He put his own sworn men in among Bolton's and placed a man from a farm in a tent with the flayed man banner because sometimes a farmhand is a better hedge against treachery than a knight. He does not wish to lose the roof over his children's heads to another man's cleverness. Winter is a siege that requires policy. He rationed what needed rationing and gave where giving would make men warm. He sent quiet this way and that to move timbers. He allowed a girl to carry a spear because the way she stood when told no made old soldiers look at their food and consider not eating. He told boys that if they could carry wood twice their weight, they could carry a sword. If they could not, they would carry wood. And the boys smiled as if he had given them titles because he had given them truth. He did not promise quick revenge. He sent for bows. Caitlin came. He saw her across the bog on the end of a day that had been mostly mud and rumor, and the way the light hit her hair made him think of harvest. She walked between Crannogmen as if she had grown there from reeds. They spoke without dignity first, which is to say they touched faces and counted fingers. He explained what he had done, and she explained how she had been keeping a war from breaking while men with a taste for fancy words tried to make meal of her. They lay together in a bed that had been a bench an hour earlier, and for a while the war was a small bad story told by a man with too much drink. Then morning came and they were back in it. She took letters Fr. him to write in a hand that would make sour lords read to the end. He asked her to be his conscience when the days grew teeth. She said she would try. She did. News came like hail. The city seethed. Stannis made his case with the terrible beauty of a man who has loved the law too much for too long. Renly laughed and gathered a garden's worth of lords. Tywin moved like a man who intends to be in all places at once. There was a boy king barreling toward a throne like a boy toward a sweetmeat. And a girl who had Ned's daughter's eyes looked out of a window and learned how to become quiet without becoming air. Ned measured his men against a road and his road against the truth. He made one decision he had not believed he would ever make. He bent. He bent in a place that was not a knee. "We will give the North the war it needs, not the war that would suit my pride," he said, and a crannogman nearby whistled 3 notes that meant in their language that this man might not be a fool. When he moved at last, it was not a dash but a wait. He moved pieces as if he were playing Sivas with his own life. He made the neck a fever that would not break. He made the twins into a thing that had to be asked, not a thing assumed. He sent men into the Riverlands to talk to potters and to old women who knew the smell of Lannister coin. He wrote Stannis and said, "I will hold the passage and draw their strength against me. You take the city if you must, but do not burn men who have hands. A man without a hand cannot harvest, and a man without a harvest is a winter you cannot win." He made a gamble that cost blood and saved children. He met Jaime Lannister on a road too narrow not to ironicize them both. The Kingslayer wore anger like a ring. His men wore his anger like more rings. Ned had a handful of men and the reeds. The crannogmen came up from the water the way a notion comes into a mind that had been too proud of its own sobriety. They struck the horses not to kill but to unseat. They cut the cinches and the pride. Jaime fought like a tale told by men who liked tales, and when he went down it was because he stepped backward into muck he had not thought to respect. Ned put his blade to the man's throat and did not cut. "We are neither of us done yet," he said quietly, which is the most dangerous thing a man can say in a war, because it invites mercy and mercy is strong. He made other choices not so elegant. He sent men to burn stores by roads he wanted, and hungry men cursed him in the dark without knowing his name. He took a village's planks for a footbridge, and an old man cried because he had planned to mend his daughter's roof with that wood. Ned sent him different planks a week later, and the old man spit in the dirt and got his hammer anyway. If you keep your lists, you can forgive yourself a little in winter. King's Landing broke itself like a bad wheel when it went over a rut too deep to be called a mistake. Stannis came with ships. Wildfire whistled a dirge. Men turned their coats and some of them applauded as they did so. Others cried as if they had lost the country of their hearts. Ned did not see it. He was at the neck, where the world narrows to a throat a hand can strangle. The Lannisters tried to force it with gold and fire and found both go out in fog. They tried to starve the bog and found the bog has no stomach. The river rose. Men dropped spears. Men went home because they had had enough. There are wars that are ended not by treaty but by boredom with death. When letters reached him with broken waxes, a stag, a hand, he read them under a pine and felt something in his spine give. He had not cut the city open. He had not been the hero in a street with boys throwing apple cores from rooftops while fire danced on the river. He had held a rope until someone else had tied the knot. He had done a different right. He went south after, not as conqueror but as son. He went to take his child home. He went with enough men to be taken seriously and with banners lowered because he would not give a city the spectacle it fed on. In the throne room there was a shape of a boy and the surname of a man. There was a woman who had remade herself into iron and was now discovering what iron does to flesh. There was, too, a small black bird that had flown in and could not find the door again for the high windows that promise exit but betray wing. Ned looked at the girl with his daughter's hair and thought that if he were to die this morning, it would be as long as the gods meant but not as good. He made terms, which is to say he made enemies who would never forgive him. He carried Sansa home, and for a season she did not know whether to sing or to sleep. Arya came to him out of air, a blade in her hand and scars that were not old enough to be called stories. He held them both as if they were his new war. Winterfell took him as it takes all of them. with the slow breath of old stone and the look of a dog who hears his master's steps on the path before the man himself knows he is almost home. He stood in the god's wood with his head bent and spoke to leaves. He did not ask Lyanna to forgive him. He asked her to forgive the world, which is not a thing to ask, but he had no one else left to ask. Revenge is a fire that eats its own wood if you do not feed it wisely. He took what he was owed and left what was none of his. He married his children as he could and let them choose as he dared, which is more than most fathers of that age and name could say. He set a watch in the hills, because a man who has lived long enough to see men change their minds knows they may do it twice. He wrote to Old Town and asked for a young maester who was not in love with orts of dead knowledge. He got one who loved bread and the smell of leather and who taught girls the uses of numbers. He taught his sons to count their silences as carefully as they counted their swords. A boy who is told a story of revenge ants the fight and the end of it. A man who becomes the story must endure the part after the end. When a house is a house again, and there are roofs to mend and petty men to scold and work to make winter not an enemy but a season. Eddard Stark lived to see 2 winters more, which is a great deal in a world that spends men like sticks in kindling. He died in his bed with a knife in a sheath in reach of his hand, and a daughter asleep in a chair by the door with a blanket half on, and a son looking like his mother always said he did when he lied, too solemn, and another girl with a smear of grease on her head from having fallen asleep in the yard while tinkering with a lantern. It was well. They buried him in the crypt, and the wolves came down to the edge of the light and put their noses to the dirt and said their stupid, perfect animal prayers. Above them, the wind had the taste of iron. Somewhere south, a man who had loved and hated him in equal measure at different hours of his life put his hand on a wall and said nothing for a long time. Somewhere north, a boy whose blood made the dark look at him with old interest looked into cloud and measured it for what it could be made to yield. The house stood. It learned all over again what winter asks, which is not revenge but endurance, and what honor tastes like when you stop calling it by its name and begin calling it by others. Bread, shelter, patience, the will to look a man in the eye and tell him a truth that will make him hate you less tomorrow than he does today. In years after, men said Eddard Stark had marched north to take a vengeance, and he had, only it was not the vengeance in their ballads. He avenged the men who would have died because pride needed them dead. He avenged the children who would have lost older brothers to roads they did not need to ride. He avenged bread ovens and seed grain and the slow, quiet work of winter. Those do not sound like knife songs. They are louder. They keep houses alive. And if sometimes in sleep his fingers tightened on the blanket as if on a blade, and his lips moved as if they counted, he had earned that too, a man who had learned to be a different sort of hard. In the stone beneath the earth the old kings lay listening, and if bones can listen they heard the living learning, and if stone can be pleased it was.